Hello guys, the performance of our websites is one of the most important things that we need to care about, and also performance of Eloquent or database queries is probably the #1 reason why the performance may be slow general on website. So in this video, I will show you three common mistakes that developers do from Eloquent from my own experience of reading other people's code. And the first mistake is, of course, n+1 query problem, which means too many queries to the database and not using eager loading. And I will show you three different examples of that. So the most typical and the most common example mentioned in the documentation, when you do post all or post get, and then somewhere in Blade, you use a relationship. So you load post by username, and the user belongs to relationship here in the model, and then the result is the table of post name and post username, but the problem is the amount of queries. So each time you do post user without loading the user up front, it does a query to the database. So for this amount of posts, we can open our Laravel debug bar, and I advise to use Laravel debug bar all the time for all the performance problems, and I will zoom it in. So we have select from posts, and then for each of the posts, we have select from users, select from users, select from users. So too many queries. But also in this page, you may see another n+1 query to the media. So another example of too many queries is actually not debugging what the packages bring with their syntax. And a pretty dangerous example, which I've encountered myself in the past, is a well-known package, Laravel Media Library. It's not the fault of the package itself, but how it is used. So for example, if you have a list of posts or whatever, and you have media objects on them, the official documentation of that package about retrieving media, it says get media, get URL, get path. But what it doesn't say is what if you do that in the for each loop. So each time you get the media and you don't eager load the relationship, again, there's a query to the database. So get media, query to the database. To solve that, of course, we need to load with here, with relationship. Instead of all, we change that to get. And with user, for example, let's save and refresh our page. We refresh, and the amount of queries is 62 now. So it's not 121, but there are still media queries. How to take care of those? So in the post model, what we do to use that Laravel Media Library is interacts with media trait, which has the relationship itself called media. It's polymorphic relationship. So we need to load that media as well in the controller. So user and media. And if we save that and refresh our page again, we have only 3 queries to the database. And I have a third example of that, a third different example. So for example, you have a page list of users and you want to show the amount of posts that they have. In the controller, you use user with posts, eager loading, that's cool. But then in the Blade file, there are 2 different ways how to do that. So you load username and then user posts count and user post without those 2 symbols. Do you know the difference? Let's, for example, comment this one out and let's load user posts count. Sounds legit, right? We refresh the page and let's see the amount of queries. There are 13 queries, which means select count is doing each query, 1 query for each of the users. But if we do it the other way around, so uncomment this one, it will do refresh only 2 queries. How to explain that thing? In this, you load the relationship function, but in this, you return the relationship data, which is eager loaded in the controller. I hope it makes sense. So this is the third example where you can bump into n+1 queries, and Laravel debug bar is a really great tool to catch those. Second most common mistake related to Eloquent performance is loading too much data from the server, although you actually need only the fraction of the data. And the most typical example of that is count. And we don't get away from that previous example. If we're loading posts count, do we need the posts? We need only the count, so we load only users and the amount of posts. So we load all the posts table with all the fields, although we actually need the count. To do that, it's better to use with count posts instead of with posts. So this with count posts then transforms this into user posts count, and then you load only the number of posts and the query is select count, or in fact it will be in one query. So let's refresh. We refresh the page and it will be only one query. It will be a subquery grouping, or in fact it doesn't even use grouping, it's a subquery instead of having select count every time. So use with count if you only need the amount of records. And a pretty similar example, but maybe less common, is to load exactly the fields that you need, for example with article here. If you need only the fields to view in the table, only those two, don't load all the table. It seems like not a big deal, but for example, if you have a table with 20 columns and some of those columns are pretty heavy, like text or text area something, it may affect the megabytes of RAM which are being downloaded into the memory to process that query. So it's not about query that much, but it's about amount of data stored in the memory for that request. So basically load only what you need to load in Eloquent. And final third typical mistake, I see that on Laracasts less and less, and that gets better from the community, but I still see that people do the operation from the database to get all the data and only then filter the data with collection or where or some other PHP statements. So in this case, if you need posts with created at with some condition, load the condition into the database. So make the database work to filter exactly the data that you need. In most cases, it will be faster. And faster not only because the database works faster because it was built for filtering in the first place, but also related to a previous thing I've mentioned, you don't load all the data into the memory. You load only exactly what you need. There are exceptions to this rule, and in some rare cases it makes sense to load the data if you have a lot of filtering and you think that in your case PHP would do it faster than the database. I've seen some cases in the past like this, but they are really rare. So these are three most common mistakes that I see people do in Eloquent in terms of performance. What do you think about them? Have you done anything of those in the past, or do you have any more to add to that list? Shoot in the comments below. And if you want to know more how to work with Eloquent in a better way, have a special course, Laravel Eloquent Expert Level, which stood the test of time, released back in 2018, but is still mostly relevant because Eloquent didn't change since then. So it's almost 4 hours of all the features of Eloquent, which you may not know. So you can purchase that for $29 plus VAT, or you can purchase my full yearly membership for all the courses, which is 20 courses at the moment, for $99 plus VAT. And also you can get it a bit cheaper depending on where you live. So for you YouTube viewers, I can share the secret URL, which is coupons.laraveldaily.com. It uses purchasing power parity to detect where you're from and give some discount up to 40% on courses, our quick admin panel, and live WarKit. That's it for this time, and see you guys in other videos.